My name is Abraham Kim. I'm the Executive Director for the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center. I want to welcome all of you to the 12th Annual National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. We're actually part of this consortium of over 100 different universities and think tank locations that will be televising the talk or the interview with Secretary Condoleezza Rice. For those of you who are expecting Secretary Rice to be here, I'm sorry to be a disappointment. But those of you who have been here in the past know that this is a televised program. But before I talk a little bit about our speaker, and also we have a speaker here who is a China expert, and I'll introduce Alan momentarily. But before I do get started, I do want to let you know that this will be on videotaped by the Missoula Community Access TV, who is recording today's session through a media grant. So this is for public consumption later on. We're very honored to have Mr. Alan Barber, who's joined us all the way from Denver, Colorado. He has, as I mentioned before, he has been helping Chinese and American executives in promoting U.S.-China trade since 1987. In particular, he is the president and founder of an organization, his company, called Denver Hainan Corporation. And I imagine part of that was to help establish or help support a new special economic zone in Hainan Island that Secretary Rice had mentioned, which became very prominent during the beginning of the Bush administration when an American plane and a Chinese plane collided with each other. But Mr. Barber has been helping not only many American and Chinese companies, but also many government officials at the state level as well as at the diplomatic level to promote greater relations and trade, but also has been talking with a lot of American leaders to help navigate the current turbulent landscape in U.S.-China relations that we're all going through right now. He has a presentation that he would like to present to you. I would imagine about 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then
as fast as I can.
As fast as he can. And then he'll turn to all of you for your questions, and we'll spend the remaining of that time answering your questions. So with that, Alan?
Okay. As I'm walking up here, he mentioned the NFL. So the NFL played an American Bowl game in Australia, and Pat Bowlen was there because the Broncos were in the game. And he said, we want to play a game in China. I heard that and I thought, what's going on? So I called my friends at the consulate in Chicago and said, what do you know about this? Nothing. So Loretta knew John Beek, who was with the Broncos. She contacted him. He actually called me from Australia, told him what we had in mind, and he said, you need to talk to the people at the NFL, so he arranged that meeting. And the guys I was working with at that time on the international side of the NFL were great. Anyway, I started working with them and got him to China. I remember this. We had an interpreter for them, and they came to me and said, Alan, he's so young. We just knew we have an older interpreter. I said, he understands American football. You're not going to find many Chinese who do. Therefore, he's the guy. After it's all over, he said, he was a great guy. I said, I knew that. And then, take it a little further, the objective was to play an American Bowl game at the Bird's Nest before the 2008 Olympics, which would have, you can imagine what that would have done for football, American football in China at that point. Unfortunately, I had a medical problem that I had to drop out, and then I had hosted Ambassador Joe and Joe to Denver, and I talked to him. I said, would you like to go to a football game? Yeah. Well, the NFL had hired some lobbying group out of DC who was supposedly really good on China. And forgive me, but I've met some of these guys, and I'm asking questions and they don't know the answers. I'm thinking, why are you even talking about China? So the ambassador wanted to go to a game with San Francisco and somebody in DC. And it was going to be before he accompanied President Bush to China so he could talk about football and the experience of the game. I called the NFL to find out if they had done anything on this, and they said, yeah, our consultant has already arranged for them to go to a game. It was after Bush went to China. And I thought, okay guys, this is not going to work. But we tried. But it was fun, and I enjoyed working with those guys in the NFL. I'm not sure how I would like working with the NFL today because of some of the player attitudes, but at that point they were a lot of fun. I enjoyed it thoroughly. So that's the story of getting the NFL, trying to get the NFL into China. They've not been successful. NBA, that's a whole different story because the Chinese know all the games, they watch them. And if you have a Chinese player on that team like Yao Ming in Houston, they're real popular. So let me give you a couple of things on background. I will cover a lot of things that Secretary Rice stated, and some of them I do not agree with, others I do. So I'll go through the presentation. Normally I like to do a presentation that's very interactive, so as I'm going through it, I'll have you ask me questions. I've got a lot of stuff in this thing. I just want to get through it. If you want the presentation, give me an email address, and I think the Mansfield Center may put it on their website because they have permission to do all of this. But I just want to get through this thing, cover the things, and then we can talk. But a couple things that I think are important. One is I started really working with Chinese executives in 1989. University of Denver had a program to teach Western management skills to Chinese executives. Now at that time, they're state-owned enterprises and joint ventures. And they actually arrived in Denver, Colorado on June 4th, 1989. Some of you in the room know that date, and that was my first challenge because we had protesters outside a reception and all this stuff. But what I learned is that these executives and American executives have a lot in common. And one of the things was very clear, they said, we want a good relationship with the United States. That has never changed. And including my August trip to China, the Chinese are, how do we improve this relationship? And one person at an institute said, China's not done a very good job of educating Americans on China and what we're doing. How can we correct this? How can we change this? So they've asked me to work with them on this project. Now keep in mind, I'm a business person, but if you're working in China, there are a lot of things you have to do that normally business people don't do. And I remember being asked in August, they said, Alan, you're a business person, but you're doing all this other stuff. And I explained to them why. They understand that. So the Chinese still want a good relationship with the US, and they take the long view. So that's an advantage for us if we can get through the situation we have today without creating major problems. So with that, I'll go through the presentation and then let's talk. So I'm going through this as quick as I can. And as I said, I'll cover a few things. I'm not going through the whole thing because I don't want to bore you to death. I just want you to have the data. The other thing I would say, I started doing Chinatown halls in 2007, which is the first year we did these. This is the most challenging presentation I've had to do, and it's the worst U.S. time in China, U.S.-China relations that I ever remember. And as Steve said, we're all in the same, a few of us are all in the same position. We've got to fix this. And the reasons why are in this. So, here we go. Now, how did China develop so rapidly from they were the 10th or lower global economy to the second largest global economy, and China displaced Japan as the second largest economy in 2010. 32 years from the 78 opening up policy. Now this is 2008. This is the 40th anniversary of the opening up policy. So let me go through this. I found this recent, well, you see the date on it, August 27th. I found this recently. The big part of this is the last in red. reflects China's growing dilemma as it muscles its way into an international system it did not create. So how does China fit into this international system that they didn't create, and they're the second largest economy in the world? And they're getting hammered by Europe and the US. Okay, this is a pretty important slide that a lot of people don't understand. In 1820, China had over 30% of global GDP. We always think of Europe and all of this, but China had the largest GDP. Unfortunately, with the First Opium War, the Taiping Rebellion, Second Opium War, Sino-Japanese War, you can see where they dropped. And it started picking up, about 78 after the opening up policy. Yeah, from 52 to 78, this is the Chinese growth. A nice curve, but it's not a lot of money, 400 billion renminbi. Okay, reform and opening up policy. 1949, founding of People's Republic. 76, Mao died. 77, Deng Xiaoping launched this Beijing Spring, allowing Chinese capitalists to join the CPC, the party. Then the leadership recognized the standard of living of the Chinese people had not improved since 49. They needed to improve that. Therefore, they did since China. So 78, the leadership initiated this reform and opening up policy using the US as a model. And the objective was to improve living standards and modernize China. Part of this too is the Chinese people are systematically gaining more freedoms. I hear in the news, Chinese people are slaves and oppressed, and go to Shanghai, go to Beijing, go to Nanning, go to any other Chinese city. Everybody has mobile phones, they're ordering stuff on Alibaba, they're happy. The one-child policy is history now. This last August, I saw a lot of two-children families. So that is changing. So the Chinese talk a lot more than they used to. When I first went there in '92, we talked a lot, but not like we are today. And then here's some quotes from Deng Xiaoping. I like the first one. If socialism is keeping us poor and continue to poor, then what is so good about socialism? Reform is China's second revolution. So China's looking at this as a second revolution. And the others, and then the next one, and this goes back to Secretary Rice, when our thousands of Chinese students abroad return home, you'll see how China will transform itself. And it is transforming itself. A comment in here, though, I want to inject. I follow a lot of things. With one of the companies I'm in, I'm looking at research in water. And out of Rice University, I've seen a number of things come out of Rice. And you really search down, okay, who developed this? It's a Chinese named person who has led that technology. A lot of this in healthcare too. So there you have a lot of Chinese here who are advancing US technologies. And then let some people get rich. Poverty is no socialism. You can read this if you want it. Part of this was new laws to modernize China, joint venture law in '79, wholly foreign-owned enterprise in '81. That meant that a foreign company could own a company in China, which is unheard of at that point. And then the cooperative joint venture law, that was important because you could use your technology instead of cash investment. And a lot of companies did this. Now those three laws hastened the modernization of China. Although they didn't work quite as they thought, a lot of the technologies didn't go into China, they came out. They produced a lot of product that was shipped abroad. I remember reading Chinese were wanting good strollers for their kids. They couldn't buy them. They're built in China, but they couldn't buy them because they're all exported. And the laws provided very strong incentives and protections for foreign investors. Laws included land, helping with employees, and most importantly, to a business person, no taxes for 5 years, then half the tax rate for the next 10. And I think that was the first 5 years after you became profitable. I'd have to go back to my old stuff to remember this. And those were first in a long list of policy changes. So they developed special economic zones, as we talked. Hainan was an island. This is a list of the SEZs. That helped propel China too. These were done to contain the foreigners because China didn't know what would happen. So the foreigners were limited to these areas. But we can tell today how well this worked. And this is what happened. This graph, the black line, you can see that, about 84 it started climbing, it dipped a little bit, and starts climbing. I just got this because what struck me is that this year, 2018, China will be a larger economy than the entire European Union. Think about that. That's a huge advance. Billionaires and millionaires in China. China now has more billionaires than America. And I've had the fortune to meet a few of them. They're just regular people. I mean, they're great guys. Growth of the Chinese middle class. 2015, 204 million. 2018, 385 million. That's larger than the US population. And compare that to countries, key regions and countries, Canada through China, but a lot of these other countries are relatively small compared to that Chinese middle class. And this is largest, 15 largest GDP countries in the world. Now the blue, the Japan and UK, they dropped from 2017. That's why they're in blue. The red ones have not overcome the effects of 2008. They're still below where they were in 2008. Now, let's go to tariffs, trade wars in the era of integrated global markets. Okay, these three books pretty much foresaw the global market and talked about this. So the first one was Nasbitt's Megatrends, and I'll tell you from the manufacturing side, I didn't agree with a lot of he said, but I understand where he's going. The second one, Mind of the Strategist by Omai, was a precursor, and then The Borderless World talks about how you have to manufacture in the country you're selling to so you meet the customer's demands. Because what's good in the US may not be good in China, vice versa. And then sampling of books written by China. Now, if you're not familiar with the name Peter Navarro, he is President Trump's trade advisor, basically. He's calling the shots. So those first three are anti-China books. Fourth book is by Michael Pillsbury. You might have heard him on television at times. He's very anti-China. And then the other two at the bottom. Now, I saw that President Trump was getting on a helicopter and somebody said, "What about China?" He says, "Oh, I know all about China. I've read the books." These are probably the books he's read. So that changes your mindset. And here's some quotes. First two, Reagan. Protectionism becomes destructionism. It costs jobs. We're seeing that. Trouble with now, don't take offense to this, but I'll tell you why I put it in. Trouble with our liberal friends is not that they are ignorant, but that they know so much that is not so. I think if you flip Chinese experts in here and China people in the US who do things with China, that applies to them, from what I've learned. And then the next one, I can't find the book. It was written in the 60s or 70s. What you are is where you were when. How you're growing up affects you. Now, I'm a kid of the Cold War era. Now, if somebody would tell me then that I'll be working with China today, I would say, you're nuts, because I'm not going to work with those guys. I've learned, I've adjusted. And I'm always constantly learning and adjusting. Okay, first Tariff Act was 1789. That was passed to fund the federal government. That was the reason for it. We didn't have an income tax back then. 30, Smoot-Hawley, protectionist, and reduced imports and exports by more than half. That's what we're concerned about today, that the same thing could repeat itself. And tariffs apply to the total value of goods not services. So services are not counted as trade with China, like tariffs. So we just look at the tariffs. We just look at the stuff that they're bringing in. Consumers ultimately pay the tariff. Not the producer, not the seller. It's the consumer, like everything else. And reducing that trade imbalance is a small part of the trade war. It seems like the large objective now, and that's what Steve and Secretary Rice were getting to, is to contain China from becoming a technology leader. It's like we're saying, we're the leader now, we're not going to let anybody else do this. And the next one is incredibly important. Chinese President Xi is a different leader than Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. He's called the second red generation. In Chinese, it's, if I'm pronouncing it right for my Chinese friends who are, or hope to be Chinese friends here, Hong Ar Dai. And he is, the way it's explained to me, Zhang and Hu were more like CEOs of corporations. You bring them in to do a job, they do the job, they leave. Okay. And they were there for 2 5-year terms, 10 years. And they were technocrats. President Xi is more like an entrepreneur. This is his baby. He's going to protect China. So if I think the Americans, and we've misjudged China numerous times over the years, I think a lot of the Americans were thinking that President Xi would probably cater because they figured Zhang and Hu would have cratered on this trade war stuff early. He's not budging, and he won't. I mean, I've got had enough discussions in China. He's not going to back down. Trump's not going to back down, so we're in a standoff. And as I said last, the West has miscalculated China many times. Timeline. Okay, Trump was in Beijing November of last year. Oddly enough, I was in Beijing that year, or the same time. Had a meeting with China Energy, which did a deal in West Virginia for three gas-fired power plants. Those are in limbo now because of this firma that Condoleezza Rice, or that they mentioned on this. It was a great meeting. It was fantastic. Walked away and we had $250 billion in agreements, or MOUs. Then May 19th, Secretary Mnuchin came back, said, no trade war, we've got an agreement. What I learned is that Navarro canceled that, or did not approve of this trade deal that Mnuchin had negotiated. In there, and this is important for the Western states, and remember, I'm from Denver. Although I appreciate no one here said, when they learned I'm from Denver, like a guy in Rapid City said, when I had a tire problem, I said, I'm from Denver, and he says, I'm sorry to hear that. So anyway, they're going to import more LNG, more agricultural products, and coal. Now, China Energy told me they're not interested in coal anymore because they're only building gas-fired power plants. So this agreement would have been very helpful to the Western states. And then President Trump announced the first round of tariffs on July 6th. Chinese said, we're done. That agreement we had with Mnuchin, it's null and void. And the Chinese have never gotten over that switch because the Chinese have said, we need stability in these negotiations. We don't know what people are going to do when they do things like this. We walk away, we think out an agreement, now we don't have an agreement. And this one I'll say quickly, it seems that the advisors to President Trump are trying to reverse the global integrated economy. And my example is, I think they want the US to be more like the old, and you younger ones won't know this, but Ford had a plant called the Rouge River plant. It was a totally integrated plant where they're making I think Model A's, maybe Model T's. They did their own steel, they made their own tires. I mean, everything was made at the Rouge. But that's what was appropriate at the time because we weren't importing a lot of stuff like that from outside the country. And, you know, look at Apple and auto manufacturers, high tech. We source from all over the country, all over the world. And getting to tariffs, looking at Apple, you have a lot of components shipped into China from various countries, South Korea, Japan, US, wherever else, to build that Apple iPhone. And you have some Chinese component or contribution. The Chinese contribution is about $6. But when that Apple iPhone comes out of China, the full value of the Apple iPhone is tariffed at the full value. To add to that, Apple is made by Foxconn, which is a Taiwanese company operating in China. So China gets hit with all of this tariff stuff, even though they're not making it. Foxconn is. They're only contributing $6 to it, but now we get charged with $300, $400, $500 for the tariffs on that Apple phone. Now what I've heard is that China is going to start putting tariffs on Apple phones sold in China, which is going to be bad for Apple because you have Huawei, ZTE, and a whole list of other Chinese companies manufacturing mobiles. Okay, trade issues. Trade imbalance is one. We purchase more from China than China purchases from us. Part of that is because there are restrictions on things that China can buy. Quick story, I think it was Honeywell wanted to sell helicopter engines to China. CFIUS killed it, saying they're dual use. That means they could be used in military helicopters. So the Chinese went to Europe and bought the engines. So what good did this do? And the protection of intellectual property. One thing I've noticed with Secretary Rice, and I don't think a lot of people understand this, I learned this year, I can't remember which trip, China has a lot of IP courts. And I was told this by the managing partner of Dorsey & Whitney Shanghai, and you have a Dorsey & Whitney office in Missoula. He said China's opening many IP courts. And the result is, last, I think it was 17, there were 60 cases in Chinese IP courts. The foreign companies won every case, so the number was 60-0. So the Chinese companies who had, shall I say, pirated the IP were told they couldn't use it anymore by the Chinese courts. So China is starting to protect IP. Another piece is because Chinese companies are going global, they don't want any bad press. So if you're I call them rogue Chinese taking stolen IP to a Chinese company, they won't use it. And I've been told that those people doing this socially will be shunned. They may never find another job again because of what they've done. So there are other factors working in China to protect IP other than the IP courts. Made in China 2025, it's got everybody upset. China, but on this part, Miao Wei, who is the Minister of Industry and Information Technology, commented recently, China's 30 years behind the US. It'll take us 30 years to catch up to the US. So even though they're working on this, it's going to take a long time to catch up. China furthering opening up. I was at a forum in Sanya last November. I learned a lot of things. China's opening up more. China's going to treat foreign companies registered in China as Chinese companies. There's a lot going on here, and President Xi will continue the opening up. And then the ability of companies to own, or US companies to own companies in China and strategic industries. That may not change because China is very firm on the strategic industries. However, with this passage of FIRMA, it's much more difficult for China to invest in the US. So we're saying open China to our companies, but we're going to restrict your companies from investing in the United States. That's not a good negotiating position. And then I just learned this. US is trying to block other countries from dealing with China. This USMCA agreement that was just signed, there's a clause in there that if Canada or Mexico sign a trade agreement with a non-market economy, which China's still considered that, then the US could leave, any partner could leave in 6 months. Now there's an important piece to this. In the WTO agreement, it was agreed that the WTO would recognize, or the countries would recognize China as a market economy. I think it was 2 years ago. It was 15 years, yeah, been 2 years ago. Europe said, oh no, you're not there yet. We're not going to recognize it. US said, oh no, we're not there yet. the non-market economy gives you the ability to do really weird things on dumping cases and other things. So when you talk about being equal, China was expecting to be considered a market economy. I think Iran's considered a market economy. So you can see the conflicts in all of this. Okay, come back to the Western states. These are US exports to China, goods and services. So you can see how it's grown from 2008 to 2017. $60 billion of Western exports to China are in jeopardy. That means all those jobs are in jeopardy. Services, you can see how that's grown and the percentages. So this is where we're headed. Now these are the top states exporting to China. 3 of the top are Western states. When I say Western, members of the Western Governors Association. So we're risking $90 billion of exports from those top states. And map for all the ag people. Look, Northern Great Plains down 17% on cash farm income. Fruitful rim, as they call it, 22%. Basin range, 21. We're not in good shape. Heartland's only 33% or 13%. And you can look at the Northern Great Plains. I learned something, a new term this morning. It's called refugee soybeans out of the Dakotas. This time of year, you'd be shipping a lot of soybeans to China. They're not buying them, so what do you do with them? And the price is down. So as I understand it, the price farmers are being offered for the soybeans is lower production cost. Now show me anybody in business who will sell something lower than production cost, because that means you're going to go bankrupt at some point quicker than expected. And then what can Montana, because this is what I want to talk about, what Montana can offer Chinese consumers? Energy, natural gas, oil, and coal. Now, China wants energy cooperation to be the keystone of the US-China relationship. And I will mention that I'm working with the Institute, Shanghai Institute of International Studies, to hold a conference on energy in Shanghai in January. If somebody here wants to go to this piece, let me know, because I'll get you there. I mean, I'm not going to pay for it. You're going to pay your own way, but you could attend. High quality beef. I mean, it's a huge market for beef. You had something going, the trade war killed it. How do we resurrect that? And I think there are ways it can be done. I talked about this because I'm working with a group out of southeastern Colorado about shipping natural gas-fed beef, and I suggested having Chinese invest in a processing plant because they don't have one, getting it to China. And my attorney friend in Beijing said she knows the chairman of a grocery chain that would probably buy a lot of beef. So there are ways to do it. We just have to figure out how to get rid of the get around the tariffs. Timber and lumber. China's getting a lot of its timber now from Russia, and the Russians are saying, "You're taking all of our timber while you're conserving yours. We don't like this." At the WG annual in June, Governor Bullock and the governors had a session on forestry management. Because let's face it, we're burning, I'm from Colorado too. I mean, we're burning down the house. China could take a lot of that timber. Tourism, you've got Yellowstone and you've got all your great outdoors activities. I learned you've got ski resorts. Chinese like to ski. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do with tourism. And remember that these tourists are, a lot of them are high net worth individuals. They may come into Montana and say, "Hey, I kind of like this place. Maybe I can establish something here to give me a reason to come back here more frequently." Quality education for Chinese students at the high school and university level. A friend of mine is sending his kid to a private school in, I forget where it is, on the East Coast, a high school. And I had a friend who sent his kid to Canada for high school. They want to go to US universities. So there's a lot of Chinese students parents who want to send their kids here for education, both high school and college. And then develop an understanding of China consumers' needs, wants, and desires, then develop a longer list than this. Because this is my first time in Missoula. So I'm not that familiar with Montana, but this is a suggestion I have. And what do Chinese entrepreneurs and execs want from Montana? They want to invest in the Montana energy industry. I was just in a forum in Houston, I think it was last month. And a lot of Chinese are saying, we want to invest in the US, but what about this FIRMA? Because that can prevent us from doing this. Chinese could come to Montana and establish food processing operations. Why send grain to China when we can send a more finished product? Because that creates jobs in Montana and new wealth in Montana. Investment in the timber industry, produce lumber for China markets. Investments in manufacturing, joint research projects benefiting both sides. I learned of a growing biotech from Abraham. Technically, I'm still working with them, but they're not interested in China because everything is going on. There's a group in Beijing that wants to build innovation incubator parks. And one of their areas is biotech. They could build one of these parks in Missoula to complement your biotech. The beauty of this group, they offer space, consultancy services, and those products can be commercialized, they'll invest. And it's that last step that every entrepreneur has a challenge with. How do I get the investment? Telecom. I carry AT&T, but I know in the West there are a lot of, and the governors have talked about this, getting more broadband and telecom in the West. Two companies could really help with that, but because of the political situation, it's incredibly difficult. That's Huawei and ZTE. And they've done this in areas like ZTE has wired a Navajo reservation in Arizona. Huawei has built for a California county that didn't have it, broadband and telecom in the county because the school needed that for their students. And I mentioned the innovation parks, which fit into the biotech. And then here it is, the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act, enacted July 23rd, 2018. I think I was in China when this thing was signed and I didn't know it. You need to become familiar with this new law and how we can get around it. Now, one thing about the law, originally, if you were going to invest 25%, it kicked in. Now it's called significant, I forget, something like that, but that language has changed, which may be a benefit. And I'll leave you with this. This is Pudong, which was a special economic zone in Shanghai in February 1994. To the left is the famous China, or the Shanghai television tower, which I'm sure you've seen sometime on TV. This was different view, same tower. Yeah, it was kind of hazy. The air was not that great. 2013 at night. You can see it's pretty clear, and this place is built up incredibly. And then another one, and the boat is a restaurant. So you spend the evening on the boat dining. And then if you feel this is worthwhile, contact Abraham, Caitlin, tell her that, especially contact Steve. You can always contact me. If it's not good, tell him Alan was terrible. Whatever you want to do, it's your deal. So I'll leave it at that as we talk. Questions? What can I answer? Anybody? Yes?
Alan, you said that the meat agreement was virtually dead, and producers in Montana haven't heard a whole lot about it, and so can you give us any more details than that?
That's all I have now. However, I will tell you this, and let me be diplomatic the way I say this. I've tried working with these organizations in DC who are supposed to be helping their members. I don't get a lot of response out of them. I was in Beijing talking to the Chinese Chamber of International Commerce. And Du Wei told me that she would like to meet some of these organizations. Well, I'm not having good luck at the Washington level, which to me is no surprise. But we could take groups of state people there to talk about these things and how we can do this. Now, a part of this answer too, and I can't go into a lot of detail, but earlier this year I received an email from a friend, again, Shanghai Institute of International Studies. He said, Alan, can you send me information on the state's response to the trade war? And I thought, okay, I can send him articles. And I thought, I can do better than this. So I started thinking about it. I came up with an idea. The idea is to take a group of US governors to China, because Chinese don't want to talk to people out of DC, and have a meet with Chinese governors to discuss how they may come up with suggestions to either mitigate, resolve the trade war. And part of this is anybody running for national election better have the support of a state governor, because you need access to their networks. Whether it works or not, I don't know. And then in August, I went back, because I had strong support for this concept in, I think it was April. And I wanted to make sure the Chinese supported it before I did anything else. So I was going to meet with the association I'm working with on this. And I expected to meet with them on a Monday night, like 13th of whatever month, well, August, I guess it was. And I received a message and said, Alan, it'd be really helpful if you would write a proposal on what you've learned about the trade war, is what he was referring to, and your vision. Now that part scared me, because I thought, vision, that's your job. And I thought, oh, I can write this fairly quickly. I know what I need to write. I started having meetings in Beijing. First meeting, I realized that I could not bring Chinese governors here. I had to take US governors to China. And then I learned to keep learning other things. So I finally finished this proposal at like 6 p.m. Sunday evening, expecting to meet my friend for dinner on Monday evening. Sent it to him. He said, good proposal. Then he sent me a voice message. Alan, I apologize. I cannot host you to dinner tomorrow night because I have an emergency business meeting out of Beijing. I'm not going to be here tomorrow. Would you talk to my associate? Sure. So meeting was at 3:30. I walked in, talked about a few other things, came to the proposal, and she said, how fast can we get this done? Now you talk about the dog catching the bus. I'm thinking, what am I going to do with this thing? They are not in a position to approve something like this because of dealing with trade war. I realized that it had to go up someplace higher than them. That's how fast it was approved. And now they're saying, how fast can we get this done? So I'm working to do this. On the China side. They're pushing it. They want to do this. The other benefit of this, though, I talked to another Beijing Academy of Social Sciences, talked to them about it, and they said, when you bring these people to China, bring business people with you, we want to fully support what you're doing. And we'll have meetings that you need with these business people. And again, the Chinese Chamber of International Commerce, CCIOC is easier, they're going to help. And they're the ones who want to meet with business people. So the Chinese are trying to figure out a way around this thing that's diplomatic and doesn't ruffle a lot of feathers. But I think we have a good opportunity. And I'm in a process of rounding up a few governors. They said, when can we do it? I wanted to do it before the midterms. I realized I'm not going to get anybody out of before the midterms, but after the midterms, yes. Now some of the governors have said to me, well, we're term limited. I said, we don't have time to wait. It reminded me of a scene, if all of you seen Top Gun, the last part of it, where Maverick is launched and they say, launch some, fighters, whatever, off of Cats 1 and 2. Can't do that, they're broken. How long they're fixed? 10 minutes. This will be over in 2. That's where we are. So we need to get that done. And as I move forward, you know, I think support out of a group like this for Governor Bullock, because I think he's interested, would be very beneficial, and it would be beneficial for Montana, because there are a lot of things we can do. Now, another friend of mine at another institute, they're coming to the U.S. They're going to be in. They went to Austin. I forget where other place. I said, "You going to Washington?" No, we're avoiding Washington. We don't want to go there. That's the attitude of the Chinese. And this friend told me, he said, we're changing our strategy. We want to focus on states and state leaders. So all these years they focused on DC. Now they're understanding we have to focus on the states, which I think is a better idea. And it's the states that get hurt by all of this.
Yeah, it is. And Washington will listen to the states.
Yes.
They don't have to listen to China right now. They have to
No,
listen to
but they'll listen to the states. And when you, and people, you know, you can talk to your members of Congress. You have 2 senators and a House representative member
There
about
are
all.
a few of us, though, that most of us who live in the state of Montana know them all personally, you know.
And that's the advantage of Montana.
Yeah.
It's that's your advantage. And talk to them about, hey, wait a minute, you know, we can't afford this. We need to change things. And they can go back and talk to their colleagues and say, you know, this is what we're learning about all of this. So it's really becoming a grassroots effort, I believe, as was, and I was involved in this in whatever year it was, China most favored nation status, if you remember that. Then it was normal trade relations, and then it was permanent normal trade relations. That was an entirely grassroots effort. And that's something like we need to do now, because it's up to people here who are getting hurt. And if you look at, I mean, I talked to Governor Burgum in North Dakota. They're the second largest soybean producer in the United States. They're getting harmed incredibly now. They have the Bakken. You know, there's a lot they could do there. I suggested to Burgum we could bring Chinese companies to North Dakota, and that can apply to Montana. I just don't know your oil and gas rules. Bring Chinese companies who want to invest in North Dakota because they need large volumes of natural gas to produce products like chemicals and all these other things. And Secretary Rice mentioned Chinese investment in the U.S. Chinese want to invest in the U.S., but with the trade war and FIRMA, they're just not sure what's going on. Now, I mentioned the IP protection. So I'm at this forum in Houston. There's an undersecretary of an agency there, and he talked, in a session, he talked about protecting U.S. IP in China. And later at the reception, I said, are you aware of the Chinese IP courts? Oh, no, I didn't know about this. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're an undersecretary. You should know about these things. You're dealing with China. And then I gave him the statistics, 60-0. He didn't know any of this stuff. So again, going back to what Reagan said, it's just so much of what they know is not correct. And that's part of that I really liked. So much of they know is not correct. Oh. Yes?
So a great deal of this presentation talked a lot about how Montana could mitigate the impact of the trade war, but talk more a little bit about the ways that Montana, or states like it, are feeling that impact now.
Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Colorado. Any state that wants to sell LNG to the United States or gas to be converted to LNG. And just so you know, I'm working with a group that's building we're just starting an LNG facility in Baja, Mexico, because gas coming out of the Gulf does not compete with Russian, Central European, Central Asian, Australian, and Indonesian gas because of the transportation cost. Because you got to either go through the canal or around. If you're the big tanker, you can't go through the canal. So what we're doing is shipping it right off the West Coast. And as I've described it, consider it a gas pipeline to China. Can't build a pipeline under the ocean. We can sure put it on ships and ship it. And China wants to buy this. Think of what that would do for all the stranded gas. Now there's another piece I just learned, and I don't have all the information. China builds LNG transport containers. These are in the model of a 40-foot shipping container. They're a big cylinder. You fill it with LNG, you put it on rail, you ship it to port, and you put it on a container ship. It's then shipped into China because China didn't have enough pipelines. So China can take that container of LNG and ship it to an inland city or wherever they need to go because they have roads and railways. They can ship it that way. I didn't know about this concept until August, and I'm working on that. Think of what that would do for stranded gas in North Dakota, Montana, and we can do it in months, not years, because it'll take us 4 years to build that terminal in. Because if you've not seen one of these things, it's a monstrous refrigerator outside. Cheniere is 1,000 acres. Yes?
I feel a little fear when you talk of the governors. China will deal with Washington, wants to deal with the states. Could there be an element of divide and conquer?
No.
China's part?
No. They don't want to divide and conquer us. They want to work with us. They want to cooperate with us. They want access to our markets just like we want access to theirs. We're at a standstill at this point. They don't want to talk to Washington. So with the governors can go. Who knows? Maybe the governors could have a meeting with the right people, and maybe China would say, these tariffs aren't working for anybody and they're harming the United States. We're going to drop ours. Who knows what comes out of a meeting like this? We never know until we sit down. But I don't see, and when you say divide and conquer, no, because I hate to say this, this was not a Chinese idea. This is my idea. And I presented it as an alternative, as a way to open discussions with the United States and at least keep the states open.
So I've insulted ours.
What?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know. And
Trepidation I feel. I had to express.
I understand that. And
I thought the same thing too.
yeah, but I understand that. But if you watch U.S. media today, I mean, I'm to the point I can't even watch it because you talk about China. China's terrible. They're trying to do this. They're trying to do that. Xi Jinping, in one of his speeches, said, the Pacific is big enough for both of us. And we don't want to conquer the United States. We don't want to be that kind of a superpower. And I learned this in August. There was only one Chinese dynasty that was expansionist. It was the Yuan dynasty. I can't remember the year. And the Yuan dynasty was led by Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's son. So a lot of Chinese are saying that really wasn't a Chinese dynasty, that was Mongolian. And China's kept its territory together. Tibet, Taiwan, that's a hot button issue in China. But as far as overtaking the US, conflict with the US, China doesn't want that, because when you talk to the Chinese, they say, we are working to improve the lives of the Chinese people. We don't need something like this to happen, because then that takes us off track because we have to focus on this rather than the Chinese people. And you might appreciate this. I was talking to my friend at China Energy. We were walking out and we were talking about all this because they have the agreement with West Virginia. Now they're concerned about FIRMA. Can we actually build those power plants? They have 300 people in Beijing working on design of these power plants. You can imagine you've got 300 people working on design work. If you can't build them, why have we got 300 people working on them? They could do something else productive. But we're walking out and he said, one thing I like about Trump is the tax cut. He said, I don't like taxes. He said, we're state-owned enterprise. We have to be very careful because a lot of money we get is from the state, and we have to be careful in how we spend that. So he's very conscious on how you spend the people's money. And I thought, can you go to a DC and talk to some of these guys? because some of our members of Congress don't seem to be that concerned about spending money. That's our attitude. And he told me, he said, you know, we have to work on China and helping the Chinese people. That's what we have to do. We don't want a conflict with the United States. So if you listen to the US media, and again, when I'm watching these US media people, how many have been to China? I doubt if many have been to China, or they say, well, I was in China 5 years ago. Okay, I'll tell you right now, you've not been to China. If you're not to China a few months ago, you've not been to China, because it's changing that fast. And the people are, I mean, the Chinese people to me have been incredible. You know, you look at the cars. GM sells more cars in China than they do the United States. I'm not sure about Ford. I don't think they do. Mercedes now has a design institute in China, maybe Shanghai, to design Mercedes for the global market. They're doing it in China. BMW has a joint venture with Brilliance Automotive, and now they're discussing, I think they might have already done it, they're going to like 51–52% of the JV, so they can control the JV. You don't have to own a company 100%, just own 51%. I learned that hard lesson a long time ago. So the Chinese, from my experience, they really want to understand the US. They really want to try to figure out how can we work together to improve everything. And a good friend of mine who was the Consul General in Chicago, I actually took him to 2 Western governors' meetings. And at one point he said, China and the US together can accomplish anything. And I believe that's true, because you link those 2 countries and the brains there. Now, talking about fear, so I'm IP and everything. So I'm listening to a commentator on cable complaining, why did Google establish an AI R&D facility in China? They should have done it in the United States. My thought is, how many kids are we graduating from college now in those kinds of sciences and engineering pieces? Church I go to, they had a graduation ceremony. I think there were 10 graduates, or, you know, one was going to be a nurse, and then hopefully a pediatric physician. 2 others wanted, one wanted to be a dancer, one wanted to go into media, one wanted to, you know, they weren't going into those types of careers where the Chinese are. So you probably have a lot more Chinese who can do AI than we do in the United States. Again, it's a global economy. Where do we go to get the skills we need to advance our technologies? And that was the first thing I thought of. I thought, wait a minute, have you seen a growth in engineering graduates? And Purdue has the largest, or did have the largest, number of Chinese of any US university. I think most of them were in the engineering school at Purdue. So that's what we're dealing with. And again, what Deng said, when the Chinese return, and what I've learned too, a lot of Chinese want to split their time between the US and China. They like the way they can do research in the United States, then they go back to China to maintain their status. So there are a lot of things that no one's talking about. Yes?
So we talked a lot about China and the good it can bring. However, on the opposing side of that, given examples like Vancouver where they come in, you have the higher-ups over in China buying up real estate and creating inflation in the market, displacing the local populace, and in Eastern Africa where they go, they build infrastructure, and then unintended outcomes come
Right.
to the indigenous, whatever group it might be. What are the possible ramifications that could happen in the U.S. by bringing in international investors to that caliber that you speak of?
Well, they're not gonna bring a lot of Chinese in. The Chinese coming in will be the executives and officers of the corporation. they're going to hire US workers. One example, Cirrus Aviation in Duluth, Minnesota. They were almost bankrupt. They were owned by a Middle Eastern, I think, sovereign wealth fund that wanted to dump them. I can't remember the full name. Chinese Aviation Company bought them. And some in Minnesota said, oh, this is terrible. They're going to move everything to China. We're going to lose the company. The president who started this company is still president. They've hired, I think, like 600 employees in Duluth. They had on the drawing boards a private jet. I think it was a single-seater jet. Sounded like a lot of fun. And they couldn't go anywhere with it. With the Chinese investment, it's gone through FAA approvals, so it's now on the market. And Cirrus is working with them in China to start general aviation. They didn't move. Smithfield Foods was bought by Zhanghui. Nothing's really changed on that, except an activist investor in Smithfield wanted to break the company up and sell it in pieces. He thought it would be more valuable. And Smithfield had a foundation that provided a lot of money for Smithfield, Virginia. It's a small town. That would all have been lost. China comes in, buys it. Nothing changed. They still have the foundation. They're still working with Smithfield. The Chinese have said when we invest abroad, now Africa's a different piece, that's Belt and Road, and China's relooking at all of this. I know that they're relooking the Belt and Road program because they've spent a lot of money in Africa and get no return on it, and they're thinking this is not a good idea. So coming back to Smithfield, I was told, and I don't have the numbers, that Minnesota is now was exporting more meat to China, and I wanted to find out if it was pork. I never got the numbers, but it could have been that, which is helping the farmers there. Now, talking about Smithfield and CFIUS, there was a Smithfield hog farm near a naval air, maybe it was a Marine naval air station anywhere on the East Coast. And CFIUS said, oh, maybe we can't allow this be purchased because they're too close, hog farm is too close to this base. I have a friend in DC who said, I can take my sailboat down there, be there in 2 hours. I can sit off the coast and observe this air base as long as I want to. So what's the big deal with having a hog farm near it? Again, this is where this CFIUS and FIRMA become really difficult. But again, Chinese who come in, they're doing this. I worked on a plant in some advising on a oil and gas drill pipe plant in Gregory, Texas. It was a brownfield development. Technology is great, no environmental risks on it, highly mechanized. They were, I think, employing 200 to 300, could go up to 6 people in Gregory, Texas. The pay plus benefits is $60,000 a year, which is good money for that part of Texas. You know, they didn't come in and bring a lot of Chinese. The reason I think that Vancouver developed like it did, that goes back to I think Hong Kong and China, where you had a lot of these individuals who were concerned. I think a lot of them were Hong Kongese, and they wanted to go to a place that they felt more secure because they weren't sure what was going to happen in China, so they all flooded into Vancouver. That's not the case anymore. So you have to look at the historical part of some of these pieces. Yeah, it created a lot of problems perhaps, but that might have been a one-time deal because the Chinese are not interested in bringing a lot of Chinese here, only the people they need, and then hire locals. And additionally, you know, you get a person in a plant like that, they may come up with another idea that they can patent, and depending on their employment agreement, or they leave and they patent it anyway, and you start a new company where they figure out a better way to do something and start their own company. That's how Silicon Valley developed. It was out of an IBM plant. And now we look what we have today. So you have to look at a lot of these things and how it impacts. And really you have to take that long-term view rather than short-term. You know, how is this going to affect us and how do we manage it? And there has to be some managing in there. But, you know, my experience, and I have a friend who, she wants to work for me because she wants to have her daughter come here and go to school. You know, that's what she wants to do. And once her daughter's out of school, she'll go back to China. But these are the types of things people are saying. So now, and that was a different time because China's become so prosperous and growing so much. Look at it, 800 billionaires. And a lot of these guys were just like a lot of people in this room. They had an idea, they did something, they developed it. And they were very successful. So, other questions? I guess it looks like the last question. Yes?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to pick up for my question. So you mentioned in your presentation that the Trump administration is concerned about China 2025 and the technological
Right.
aspirations that they have. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about where would you draw the line on U.S.-China trade, you know, from an American citizen's point of view, not so much an American businessman's point of view. Where are the security lines that you think might need to be considered given Chinese technological development and the long-term security implications that they might have for the United States?
Let me answer by this. A number of years ago, had a good friend who's no longer with us. He was a retired 3-star Army. Very supportive of what I'm doing in China. That was and would still be if we were still here. At the fall of the Soviet Union, he commented that he said, "Alan, I'm really concerned. Now that the Soviet Union is gone, there are people in Washington who want to make China the next enemy." He said, "This is a mistake because China has an economy, Russia never had an economy." So we went through Clinton, Bush, Obama. That's 24 years. I thought, okay, we're through all of this. Trump hired people who worked for Reagan and were in that era. And I think they're hyping a lot of the security issue. China, if you talk about high tech, there are a lot of things that China could do with the United States. My one friend is with a company that's building smart cities. They're doing it very, very well in China. And they have the experience because this is all new these are all new projects. I think if we work together, and the more we work together, the more closely we work together, we lessen the chance of these security issues because we start understanding each other. If we want to send a carrier battle group off of the South China Sea, that's only going to aggravate everything. If we can start working together, and this is the Chinese position, we can be friends. We may not always agree, and I'll explain that by 1992. I hosted a group of Chinese mayors in Denver. And I was I was the host, so I was sitting next to the lead mayor of Kunming, China. Through an interpreter, he said, "Alan, there's some things we'll never agree on. But there are other things we will agree on. Let's focus on those." So I think we need to focus on those types of things. And with the technology, here's a story. So a friend of mine is a VP at ZTE. He's in Denver. And Australia has just said Huawei and ZTE cannot participate in 5G in Australia. That leaves Australia to Ericsson and Nokia. Well, when I was in Hangzhou, a company I'm working with across the way, building top of it says Nokia. And I mentioned this to my friend, and I said, wait a minute. Nokia's building stuff in China, and they're keeping, Australia's allowing them, keeping you out. What about the China components? He said, that's not a problem. He said, they'll just build them in China, ship them to Europe at their factory, put them together in a product, and then sell them to Australia. That's the way this works now. So a lot of things that I think governments are doing, there's not an understanding of how business really works. So, that's the best answer I can have. I think the more cooperation, the less security risk we have.
Well, on that note, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Alan, and please.
One last thing. You mentioned China 2025. Do you have the official version of China 2025?
I read it a few months ago, I haven't read it.
The Chinese version of it?
No, I don't read Chinese.
No, it's the English. It's the official Chinese version translated into English. All of 2025. And then they came out with a white paper a week or so ago on the trade war. I have all of this stuff. So if there's stuff you want, give me an email or I'll give you my card. You can send me an email and say, send me this stuff. Don't tell me to send everything because you'll get a dump. But I can get that to you because I think it would be helpful to read China's position on the trade war and the original 2025 document, if you want it. So that's an offer if you want it. Otherwise, fine. Okay.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
insights.
Thank you.